Hey, friends, I want to tell you guys a story about Stevie Ray Vaughan and the Rolling Stones. I've been reading this book, Stevie Ray Vaughan Caught in the Crossfire, by Nick Patoski and Bill Crawford, and man, it's really, really good. There are so many fun stories in here that I'd never heard. One of those stories is Stevie Ray and the Rolling Stones. It starts out Stevie Ray Vaughan is not famous. He's playing bars in Texas, probably developing a name for himself there, but outside of Texas, not a lot of people know about him. So Stevie Ray Vaughan's manager, Chelsea Milliken, is trying to get him a record deal. And one day he's hanging out at a horse track outside of Austin, and Mick Jagger is there. And he knew Mick Jagger from previous business dealings. Mick Jagger, they're hanging out, and Mick Jagger makes an offhanded comment about it's a shame that there's a lack of competent blues musicians on the contemporary scene. And Chelsea Milliken's ears pop up, and he's like, well, I got somebody you need to know about. And he gets him this videotape of Stevie Ray Vaughan playing at that same horse track a year earlier with Double Trouble, playing a festival there. So he gives this videotape to Mick Jagger, and Mick Jagger goes back to New York. A few days later, Charlie Watts is over at Mick Jagger's house there in New York, and he sees this videotape, and he plops it in. Watts was floored by what he saw. Garbed in white kimono decorated with bamboo leaves, a silver concho belt, and a black hat with a silver band, Stevie Ray Vaughan navigated the realms of the dirty and the lowdown like no one Watts had heard in 20 years. The way the Vaughan kid jumped right into Earl King's Come On was not imitative or slavish in the least, but rather fresh and authentic. He made the song by the New Orleans guitarist sound like he'd written it himself, wielding such flash and might that his guitar sounded like it was on fire. The Vaughan face in full contorted grimace as he bent the strings on a newly found Strat whose wiring hung out like guts. Slinging the guitar behind his head, hopping backwards and sashaying his hips, the way he tore through Howlin' Wolf's Tell Me was like he was Hubert Sumlin's lost brother. He had the audacity to top it off with manic depression. As Watts watched the tape of Stevie unstrapping his guitar and banging it against his Marshall amps, bringing the feedback up to a violent crescendo, he made a move for the telephone to call Chelsea. But Charlie Watts was completely blown away, and he picked up the phone, and he called Chelsea Milliken, and he's like, man, this guy is great. When can we see him play live? And they arranged about 4 weeks later, Stevie would come to New York. And the Stones had a record label, and they were thinking about signing Stevie for that. So this was an audition. They had a showcase that they set up at some really hip, trendy club called the Danceteria there in Manhattan. So at first, the gig had all the trappings of a rough, ill-fated voyage. Amps blew up, guitar strings broke like there was some kind of hex on the band. But when the stage manager tried to cut them off after their allotted 35 minutes, a typical New York set, but hardly time to wind up by Texas standards, Ron Wood pulled the curtain open while Mick Jagger yelled, "Let them play!" He threw in an F word in there that I didn't. Stevie and the band gladly accommodated him. If someone was going to stick up for them in a viper pit like the Danceteria, it might as well be the Rolling Stones. It was the first time I met him, Stevie said of Jagger. I attacked it. I kept seeing somebody I thought I recognized from Texas. This guy jumping up and down, acting like he was playing with us. Come to find out about an hour later that it was Jagger I'd been staring at. Every time we'd stop, Jagger would scream, "Keep playing! Hell with it! I'll buy this place!" It goes on to say that Stevie Ray was never one to really be into celebrities. Just the old blues greats were the ones that usually impressed him when he met them. But this place was completely different. He could not believe how many famous people there were in one bar. You looked over and there's Johnny Winter, and then you look over this way and there's Andy Warhol, which is pretty amazing. I love the idea of Andy Warhol letting his hair down at a Stevie Ray Vaughan show. Stevie said that Ron Wood kept saying he wanted to sit in with us, but he never would. Hanging out backstage surrounded by New York's glitterati was a heady trip. Vials of cocaine magically appeared and disappeared. Ron Wood was so hammered he couldn't hit his mouth with a cup. Jagger wandered around, mumbling to everyone around him, "Bloody hell! I peed me pants. I may be vain, Stevie said later and laughed, but I'll take a little bit of credit for that. It was true. He had played so good, he made the leader of the world's greatest rock and roll band lose bladder control. There was a photographer there that night who took some wonderful pictures. One of those photographs ended up in Rolling Stone magazine in the random notes section. It's a picture of Stevie and Mick, and man, they just look like they're having the best damn time. I can only imagine when people around the country saw this young Stevie, and he looked really young. But like, who is this cat? Who's this cat hanging out with the Stones? That had to help his career in some small way. They set up afterwards and hung out, and Jagger just kept heaping praise, saying, "You need to open up a tour for the Rolling Stones." And they completely loved him, loved everything about him. And I'm guessing Stevie came back to Texas, with pretty high spirits. The book goes on to say, in the end, all the band wound up getting out of the showcase was publicity. Despite the wild night at the Danceteria, Jagger later phoned Chelsea to tell him the label was passing. His act was a blast to party to, but frankly, Rolling Stones Records wasn't interested in signing a blues band, since blues bands had a rather limited appeal. The label wanted someone with the potential to sell 1 million records, not 33,000. That is brutal. That's brutal. Milliken was pissed off, and said, man, Stevie would sell 30,000 in the first week in Texas. And I think that's probably true. It probably would have been true. And it's kind of a gut wrench that the Stones, of all people, wouldn't sell or wouldn't sign a great blues band. Somebody who they thought was that great because it was blues. That's kind of that's rough. But that's the music business for you. But I really enjoyed this book. There are so many great stories in this. Stevie Ray Vaughan caught in the crossfire, Joe Nick Patoski, and Bill Crawford. I urge you to pick up a copy. There's so many things that we've talked about on this channel that actually pop up in this book, like the trip that Stevie Ray took to Nashville to record with Cowboy Jack there at the Cowboy Arms Hotel. I've actually recorded episodes of this show at the Cowboy Arms Hotel. I didn't know that recording session took place, and I guess it did not go very well. Stevie didn't like it and refused to shop it to labels or whatever. But I guess these recordings are out there, made in 3 days. Cowboy Jack. And this would have been about the same time Townes Van Zandt and people like that were recording there. Nancy Griffith. Interesting cross-section. But there's a lot of stories like that. A lot of familiar names pop up that I just didn't know were ever associated with Stevie Ray Vaughan. And like I said, I urge you to pick up a copy. Tell me what your favorite Stevie Ray Vaughan song is. And subscribe to this channel. And I will see you somewhere down the road. Much love to you.